Far from Streets by Michael Griffin. 1. Dane and Carolyn's life together followed an unremarkable, almost blandly linear trajectory. From college in Eugene to jobs in Portland, acquaintance to dating, cohabitation to marriage, 20s, 30s, 40s. One unremarkable suburban tract home, then a second. Career stood foremost in both their minds. Carolyn did contract technical writing from home, while Dane was a financial analyst for a heavy industrial business across town. Carolyn grew fond of having the house to herself every day. Dane gradually came to realize he quietly despised his job, for no reason he could name. Their life was straightforward, perfectly usual and unremarkable until Dane inherited, from an uncle he had barely known, a parcel of 49 wilderness acres. No one in his family had ever seen the plot, nor had heard the uncle mention it. Carolyn voted to sell the land and use the money to move from their starter home near John's Landing to a much bigger place, her dream house in a new development on Portland's easternmost edge. The object of her desire featured purple marble countertops and granite floors, high ceilings, and tall windows overlooking the lushly varied green of an undeveloped hillside. Dane was driven by a wish for fair compromise. He hoped to chase his dream without depriving Carolyn of her own. Their finances could stretch to manage the big suburban home without selling the acreage. He had important plans for that land, and though Carolyn shared none of his interest in that direction, he believed she might come to see the value in what he had planned. So it was that Dane ordered designs to build a cabin and undertook research in earnest. He purchased books explaining centuries-old techniques of artisanal construction and found online sources for old-style craftsman tools such as felling and hewing axes, adze, and awl. A little tightening of the belt wouldn't hurt. In fact, there could be pleasure in sacrificing to fulfill one's lifelong aspirations. They would be first in their social circle to own both a showcase city home and a weekend getaway. The purchase of the new place was a simple matter of paperwork. The mortgage was a big commitment, a daunting sum measured against their combined earnings, but everyone agreed, even their realtor, it was sensible to buy the most house they could afford. The market could only keep going up. Their life of weekdays continued. Work. Routine. Dane's other plan could only be realized through time and sweat. From their first visit to the land, his imagination thrilled at possibilities. Nights at home, he lay awake obsessing, never questioning the effort and sacrifice would be worth it. Their 49 acres abutted Mount Hood National Forest, a vast expanse of mostly wild and inaccessible public land. Effectively, this was an annex of many thousand adjacent acres, unlikely ever to be touched or seen by anyone but themselves. For Dane and Carolyn to change their lives would require a sacrifice of weekends. 2. The setting chosen was an area where thick, old-growth forest met a field of wild grass verging on a stream too small to appear on maps. Dane insisted on referring to the stream as our river, so a river is what it became. The water anchored this section of land, provided gravity for it. At the river's edge, where grass trailed off into shoreline, was a flat section of firm, dry soil where they could build. Dane sought to convey the strength of his obsession, to make Carolyn understand his hunger for the quiet land. A passion almost like physical lust compelled him toward certain notions, to remove himself from the city, to retreat to this private refuge in the shelter of Oregon's tallest mountain. What he kept hidden was the depth and urgency of this wish to be absented from civilization, to leave behind society, culture, obligations. He imagined what she'd say if she knew how he ached to leave behind all they'd known. In his vision, they would relinquish everything they owned, all they'd worked for, no matter the cost. This included even the new suburban house. Such was the pull of the vast sky and untouched miles of ancient pine and Douglas fir. Had any human ever walked this land? No streets delivered their property to the world outside. The site was 4 miles from where they hid their car among the trees, off Fire Road 6. They traversed public forest land to their own parcel. At first, they camped in a simple tent, enjoyed the river, explored fields and forests. Their footpaths were trails. Dane carried in tools, built a lean-to beneath which to shelter materials between weekends, then moved on to the felling of trees of appropriate size and straightness. These he hewed into beams, or sawed into lumber. In lieu of foundation, he sunk piles held firm in pre-mixed concrete, 50-pound bags from Home Depot hauled in one at a time. The concrete was Dane's sole concession to modernity, to experience. The piles he crossed with beams, which formed the base on which all else would rise. Where possible, Dane preferred doing the work himself. Carolyn was physically strong and willing to assist with tasks requiring more than 2 hands. Mostly she lay sunbathing upriver, working her way through a stash of pulp and noir paperbacks she'd collected since college. In no time, she finished the complete Dashiell Hammett, moved on to Raymond Chandler. After Chandler, she moved on to Goodis and Kane. Summer saw her reach the bottom of the dusty crate of old paperbacks, 2 or 3 every weekend. She'd been carrying them around for a quarter of a century, and finally plowed through the whole lot, all in a row. She needed the books to keep her busy. Carolyn possessed the pale skin of a natural redhead. Since her 30s, she'd cultivated that whiteness, believing it fit with her intense auburn hair. After so much time reading under the sun, Carolyn's complexion gradually darkened, such that Dane barely recognized her. He remarked over and over that she looked more like the girl he'd met in college. Self-sufficiency was foremost among rewards Dane sought. Out here, he was self-guided and, in a sense, alone. Often he cut, hewed, and hammered 16 hours on Saturday, and again on Sunday. His body, soft and white from 20 years manipulating spreadsheets in a fluorescent cubicle, tanned and hardened. His back grew straight, shoulders square. Cords of forearm muscle bulged. They both transformed, not as a primary intention, but as a pleasant side effect, into younger and more vital selves. Dane insisted that sleeping within the cabin should wait until it was completely finished. Airtight, as he liked to say. Even when the cabin had walls and a roof, they slept in their tent beneath open sky, anticipating. 3. The weekend of completion finally arrived. Dane framed 2 small windows and set the door on hinges. Now the place could be closed against weather. An end to rain blowing through. Squirrels nesting. Their second home was about to become a real home, smaller certainly than the Portland place, more humble. The cabin, though, was entirely self-made. Dane went outside at the end to survey what he'd built. From conception to final realization, he'd created something following only an inward drive, a compulsion of his own without regard for anything else in the world. Here, amid rustling firs and the river's mellow churn, was a refuge for himself and his wife, a place of purity. Dane's hands trembled. When he tried to speak, to tell Carolyn it was finally done, emotion surged, threatening to overrun him. Such relief, and yes, pride of accomplishment. He waited to speak until he regained control. Carolyn approached. "You should take a break. You never stop to eat anything all day." "It's finished," he said. "It couldn't be more perfect." Through long construction, she'd seen the place in and out. Still, he wanted to present it to her formally, as if the place were never before seen, a humble sort of ceremony. Dane straightened, mindful of his posture and the position of his hands. He stood on the small porch threshold, looked significantly at his wife, and swept open the door with a flourish. Carolyn stepped up, was about to enter, when a bird swooped out of the darkening sky, past her, and into the cabin. Dane conceived in a flash that this was an almost mystical good fortune, proof of nature blessing their presence here. When he entered, though, he found the swallow ricocheting madly, striking walls and windows. No, stop. The bird slammed a window, reversed wildly. The glass didn't break. Wings fluttered, out of control. Dane flailed his arms, trying to scare the creature toward the door. Go out! The bird ping-ponged in escalating desperation, back and forth, ignoring Dane's efforts. Finally, it thumped again into a new window and fell motionless to the floor amid a disarray of feathers, blood, and shit. Leaning in from the threshold, Carolyn surveyed the scene. I got confused, Dane said. Found windows where it's always been able to fly through. So you don't think it's a bad omen? No bad signs here. No mishap of nature would ruin Dane's plans so easily. I'll clean this up. He went outside, took off his shirt, and dampened it in the river. He returned to find Carolyn sitting atop the picnic table, chin on her knees, watching as if in judgment. Already the sun verged upon the treetops. Dane went back inside, swept out loose feathers, and then scrubbed away what he could see by the lantern. Many times he returned to the water, rinsed clean, and wrung out the shirt, then continued inside. Eventually, Carolyn stepped past where he knelt and climbed into the sleeping loft. Dane wanted to repair all that had gone wrong, worrying how it would look by tomorrow's harsher light. The place couldn't be perfect anymore. Already, entropy was underway. His eyes strained to discern drops of blood on unsealed wood. Outside, the sky was fully dark. Lantern light was sufficient to reveal obstacles in the night, but inadequate to reveal the sort of fine detail over which Dane had obsessed during construction. Of course, he was missing some of the blood. The bird seemed to spray death over every surface, in just seconds. 1 minute flying weightless, then a flurry of panic, and it lay there broken, extinguished, without warning. Dane decided to quit, went to the river to wash his hands and rinse his shirt before hanging it to dry. On the way, he remembered leaving the dead bird out in the grass where he'd sorted the mess inside. He took up the adze, and beside the bird's body dug a suitable grave. The tool found hard stone a few inches down. He excavated around it and pulled out a flat rock, perfectly round as a saucer. He dug a little deeper and placed the bird in. It seemed too light, too insubstantial, to have ever been a living thing, pulsing with blood. Briefly he paused, considering whether he should offer words. Nothing came to him in his exhaustion. He grabbed the round stone and returned to wash in the river. Water, so cool, black and endless, flowing away all the blood, the dirt and feathers. Everything disappeared downstream. The contamination of death cleansed away. Invisible beneath the water, his fingers rubbed the stone disk, traced indentations in its surface. Carolyn, he remembered, maybe still awake. Taking the stone along, he went inside, found Carolyn already sleeping. So much for his plan, the ceremonial christening. There would never be another first night. Despite disappointment, he couldn't blame her. It was just that he kept looking, hoping for ways to make her part of this. Dane angled the lantern so its light revealed the disk's surface. Inscriptions or carvings, like an oversized coin or medallion, lined the edge. He couldn't read the words, wasn't even sure the shapes were letters. In the center was a sculpted shape, more symbol than representation. Fascinating, but Dane wasn't sure what to make of it. He placed it next to the lantern and then extinguished the light. Carolyn's breathing and sleep was unmistakable. Dane relinquished the last of his plans and settled back, lulled by the rhythm of inhalation and exhalation. The gravity of profound fatigue surged up, surrounding him. 4. Nudged awake. Someone. Dane opened his eyes to perfect blackness. A moment of head-spinning terror. He was blind, buried alive. He remembered the cabin. Something's moving, Carolyn whispered. Outside. Dane sat up slowly, careful of the loft's low ceiling. What's wrong? He felt around with his hands, orienting himself. Such perfect darkness. No up or down. No sense of time. Like staring into an abyss. Shuffling footsteps, she said. And lots of murmuring. No, he shook his head, trying to wake up. Animals were scared of us. All those nights we slept in the tent. Nothing bothered us. She sat silent. Breath held. He, too, tried to listen, but heard only blood pulsing through eardrums. Such deep quiet. What about other people? She asked. Nobody lives within 10 miles, he said. It's a rough hike even in daylight. You said this would be peaceful out here. You knew I never liked camping, but you maybe... I didn't. I thought at least when the cabin was done we could feel safe. She shivered, as if to make a point. We're safe. How is this peaceful? It ain't pitch black and 1,000,000 miles from people? If something went wrong here, we'd be dead. She reached, clicked the lantern on. Her fingers brushed the stone disc, but she didn't seem to notice. Aren't you scared? I was sleeping. Dane reached past, clicked the lantern back off. Nothing's here. If there is something, it can't get in. Go back to sleep and you won't be afraid anymore. He lay back. She shifted beside him, and then was still. And soon she breathed, a gritty respiration, almost like snoring. Asleep again. Dane felt the forest's weight above him, around him, as if it might bear him under like a wave. The night oscillated like slow breathing, deep in the chest of a black, shuddering void. 5. Pale blue luminance pulled Dane from sleep. Still early. Not enough rest, but he wanted to get up, wanted to see, before Carolyn. He put on jeans, boots, and shirt, grabbed the stone object he'd found last night. He shut Carolyn inside, still dormant. Out in the shivering dawn, he found the clearing about the cabin marked by many scattered footprints. Not animal, human, barefoot, and in various sizes, a milling crowd in the perilous quiet of midnight, while he and Carolyn slept within, protected only by thin panes of new glass. Imagining the worst was no help, though. This was the forest. There were no barefoot multitudes wandering at midnight. Maybe yesterday he'd gone barefoot after working. Usually he wore boots, and he didn't recall taking them off, but he must have. Maybe it was Carolyn. Whatever this was, he couldn't let her get the wrong idea. She'd been so afraid. He'd dismissed her. For the first time, she'd admitted to not enjoying the place like he did. What would happen if she no longer wanted to come? Her first idea had been to sell the land. She couldn't take this away. The only reason she ever wanted to sell was for money to buy the new house, but they'd gone ahead and bought it anyway. Sure, it was a stretch, but now that Carolyn had what she wanted, shouldn't he have something too? Part of Dane wanted to blame Carolyn for how things went last night, not for the bird, but for how she made him feel foolish and inept afterwards. Like somehow he should have known better. The way she sat glaring while he cleaned up. With the sole of his boot, Dane scrubbed away the footprints, first outside the door, then the clusters by each window. By the time Carolyn emerged, he'd eradicated all signs. He'd packed everything for the trip home. If she noticed any signs, any hint to prove her fears were justified, she said nothing. 6. Most often they returned to the city Sunday afternoon. Sometimes they waited until Monday morning, before dawn. Dane needed little time to prepare for work, and Carolyn telecommuted. Usually staying over was Dane's idea, trying to squeeze more hours out of the weekend. Another night, the longest possible break from real life. He never needed an alarm. Some subconscious voice always knew when it was time to return. Gradually, as he drove, Dane returned to himself, like waking from anesthesia. A slow crossfade, one existence slipping away, all the logic of that way of life relinquished. One matched set of priorities and assumptions gave way to another, like swapping oneself for another. One home separated from the other by a permuted sequence of turns and stops. A code to be cracked. Out there, I have this sense of time stretching. Dan hadn't spoken since they left the fire road, where their Audi wagon hid among the trees. Carolyn startled, as if she'd forgotten him. Dane continued. In town, a day's just a day. Out in the forest, everything dilates. Carolyn glanced at him. Maybe it's your brain that's dilated. Dark circles under her eyes made her look older. Near the top of their hill, he turned left onto Suffolk, a street lined on both sides with houses in subtle variations of gray. Some upstairs bay windows were on the left side, others on the right. I'd rather stay out there, Dane said, pulling into their driveway. It was one among many, neither first nor last, highest nor lowest. Some unmeasured stretch of forest time versus 2 normal days here. The garage door hummed, a curtain rising on a stage. They idled in the driveway. You worked 20 years, Caroline said, fighting for a good position, a better salary. Is crunching numbers at a desk really so hard? What did she know about whether it was hard or easy? He was the one who'd been doing it 20 years. It's hard, but not the way you mean. Why should I have to justify it to you? My job isn't so much difficult as tortuously dull. Carolyn blew through pursed lips. You're a suburban guy who likes to go out and play in the forest. Drive the $50,000 SUV out to the cabin. Play pioneer on the wild land. How do you think you'd survive if that shit was real, if you had no other choice? We'd do great, Dan said. Everything would be perfect. No, Dane. The set of Carolyn's mouth indicated something sour on her tongue. Once we're accustomed to luxuries, having health insurance, money in the bank for treats, then maybe it sounds fun to pretend your life is actually primitively simple. That you're this pure-hearted being immune to modern bullshit. Go out to the cabin, don't bother shaving, don't even wash yourself, spend all day hunched over the river to catch $6 worth of fish. That's fun sometimes, I get it. Not as much fun as you think it is, but fine. The point is, if we didn't have the Audi parked in the trees and this other house 40 miles away, and a job to go back to with its 401k, and all my clients lining up to hire me and pay me to do unpleasant work for them, without all those things, nature would just be hardship, just doing without, basically suffering. Dane considered. He understood what she meant about living without a safety net. Yes, that had to be scary, at least at first, but he believed the fear indicated proximity to the primal. Just let go and drop through to authentic existence. It's not suffering I want, Dane said. Through suffering we come out the other side, to an existence simpler and more profound. That's what I want, someday. No, she said. I get used to the good stuff. No, I'm not giving it up. I love a nice peppery Shiraz, a tart, lusty Pinot, chocolates from Moffat, a nice stinging hot bath, heavenly candles and perfumes, all my books, the trashy and the serious, high-def movies on the big projector. These facets of their other life, the looming realization that it was back to going through motions, made Dane tired, heavy-limbed. She always asked what was so hard about it. It wasn't dangerous or physically strenuous. The hours were moderate, The office climate-controlled Monday through Friday. Dane sat in a $900 ergonomic task chair. Which aspect should cause this weight in his chest, this sense of facing terrible doom? Everyone had obligations. Work was the price, part of an exchange, to enable brief getaways. The garage light blinked out. Dane clicked off the Audi's headlights. The black rectangle gaped before them, a void of unknown depth. Isolation does something to me. He always struggled to convey the important things. Reading by lantern instead of staring at computers and TVs. You can read at home. Carolyn was looking away. It's more than reading, he gestured at the house. I dream of giving this up. Some component of the car ticked, keeping time. He switched the headlights on. Carolyn sighed. We can't subtract ourselves from our world, Dane. The world we're born into is the one we get. Ours is modern. It is technology. People work and drive cars around, use phones and computers. She paused. How do you go back to a world without those things? Dane, you can't. You don't want to. Yeah, I don't. She waved the back of her hand at him. We can retreat. Pretend the world's all rivers and trees. No matter how long we sit out in that cabin, this world doesn't go away. It remains, waiting for us until sooner or later the weekend is over. I'm just sick of all the bullshit and noise. You work here, not in an office. You don't know the cubicle chatter. I'm trying to zero in on what's real. Out in the trees, maybe that kind of talk sounded poetic, Carolyn said. Sitting here now, it just sounds ridiculous. I'm dirty and I stink. I want a shower. This wasn't ridiculous. Dane tried seeing her way, remembering all she sacrificed, spending weekends outside. It cost him nothing to let her go inside, get cleaned up. Later, he could figure out a better way to explain. For tonight, they could relax, watch a movie with a bottle of wine. Carolyn always had some impressive new bottle. He'd get by until Friday. Dane pulled into the garage and pressed the remote. The door slid down. The house was windless, neither hot nor cold. It smelled neutral, as if no living had ever occurred within. A strange, artificial locale. Furniture showroom or movie set. Someone else's concept of the ideal life. Seven. Dane held his rod and reel in the shallows, trailing a line downstream. Perfectly transparent water took on the green and brown of the rocks, with distortions where the water curved. Sometimes it was possible to see a fish holding in the still places downstream from larger rocks. Most often no fish were visible, even when present. The trick was envisioning places fish might likely hold. Carolyn approached after spending the heart of the day on her own. She peeked into a wood bowl left resting on a flat rock. The bowl contained dark purplish berries Dane had picked. Some unfamiliar hybrid, neither blackberry, boysenberry, nor black raspberry. Guessing her unimpressed by the berries, Dane placed the pole into a notch between rocks and crouched to delve into the stinging cold water of an eddy. He pulled out a metal string holding the morning's catch, 5 glistening trout of good size. Along with the berries, today's haul, which was the best he'd seen, ignited a thrill of potential self-sufficiency. Fishing and foraging this good? Dane shouted over the current. We can haul in less food. He grabbed the pole, reeled in, and joined Carolyn on the bank. From his pocket, he produced a cloth bundle which he unwrapped to reveal mushrooms, bent, thin stems, and slightly crushed caps. Carolyn looked puzzled. We can't eat those, don't you recognize? Of course. In college, he grinned. Finney's boat, the reservoir. We drank mushroom tea and tripped under the stars. You, me, Vinny's girl. I think her name was Zoe. Like you said, Dane, college, we have jobs. No, there's still time, he protested. Tomorrow's Monday. You want to show up to your kickoff meeting tripping on psychedelics? Puking your boss? We still might. You have to be up at 5 tomorrow, she insisted. We're not those people anymore. It's not 1980, whatever. He shook his head. God damn it, what's the point of working if we can't... You're going to rebel yourself right out of a job, Dane. You scrambled so long for a little security. Security. He kicked a shore rock into the water. I'm only making money now because it's a job nobody wants. Jobs people actually want don't have to pay as much. Please, we'd be better off impoverished? I've been poor, remember? Have you forgotten all the brutal jobs we climbed our way out of? College grads line up to work in record stores, bookstores for nothing. Nobody's lining up for my job. They have to pay 6 figures because it'll drive you fucking crazy. Your work has value. Your company rewards you for it. Jesus. You'd be happier if you saw it that way. He approached as if in reconciliation, perhaps conceding her point, and wrapped one arm around her shoulder. His free hand brought the mushroom pieces near her mouth. She shook her head. He pressed between her lips, trying to force past her teeth and tongue. He laughed, still trying to be playful. When she resisted, he pushed with more force. Carolyn squirmed free. Are you crazy? She spat brown fibers and wiped her mouth. No, Dane, I said no, and you're not doing it either. She swatted the bundle, knocked it out of his hands. Dane squatted, picking bits of the psychedelic mushroom out of the dirt. In one palm, he separated the good pieces from fragments of leaf and twig. God damn it, Dane! Carolyn tried to kick his cupped hand. He held the mushrooms protectively up near his chest. She jumped on his back, swatted at his hands. He extended his hands beyond her reach, resisting until she became frustrated and climbed off. Breathing hard, she stood away and resorted to toe-scuffing the section of ground from which she'd already retrieved most of the mushrooms. Fine, I get it. Dane stood back. You think you don't need this? Carolyn lunged, drove a flat palm into the center of his chest. He backed off, heart pounding. She ran into the room and emerged with a sleeping bag draped across her shoulders like a vagrant's blanket. The sun was still bright, hours from setting. She meandered up the shore, over uneven sandy soil and rocks made round by lifetimes of persistent streaming. Usually she took a paperback when she wanted to read. This time, no book. Dane watched her slow progress until she stopped where he expected. The flat section of clean sand was protected from wind by grassy berm. Carolyn spread out the sleeping bag, untied her shorts and pulled them down, then stripped off her t-shirt. If she noticed Dane watching, she gave no indication. He took voyeuristic pleasure at first, seeing his wife like this. At such a distance, it was like watching a stranger, some unknown woman disrobing and preparing to recline in the sun. Soon he resumed feeling angry, both at himself and at her. 8. Dane put the string of trout back into the stream to cool while he fished. He needed to clear his mind. The repetitive motions of casting and reeling took on a meditative aspect. So unaware of time, he might have continued on, despite having taken an excess of fish. But the stringer only had hooks for 12. With nowhere to carry the 13th, he had to smack its head on an exposed rock and carry it with the others to the flat, shelf-like stone, where he gutted and cleaned his take. The last fish wasn't a trout at all, but something strange, exotically striped. He didn't bother gutting that one, just set it aside. A dozen rainbows would be plenty. Dane took the cleaned fish to the picnic table and built a fire. After the food had been going a while, and just as worry about Carolyn began edging into Dane's thoughts, she returned. Fully dressed in pink with sunburn, she dragged the sleeping bag behind her. She glanced into the cookpot of lightly boiling red stock and sniffed. Dane stirred chunks of white fish, diced onion and garlic, celery and spinach. Fisherman's stew if you're hungry. Carolyn leaned towards the clearing edge. What's that? She pointed towards the 13th fish. Eel thin and black with yellow stripes. It lay dead in the dirt, a step or two from where he buried the swallow. Ew. Fucking demon fish. I'm not eating anything that came from the same river as that. Dane shrugged. It looked weird, so I left it out. Carolyn approached and leaned over the dead thing cautiously, as if it might leap up. She reached, almost touched it, but backed away, making retching sounds. Fine, I'll get rid of it. Dane used a discarded scrap to foil to grasp the slippery thing. The horned black skull looked weirdly human. Though tempted to hold it up to Carol and tease her squeamishness, he himself disliked the eel-like slipperiness of it. He took it to the river, flung it in, then returned, and dropped the foil in the fire. It hissed and sputtered. This stew just has the good river trout we always eat. You like those? Carolyn popped a cork and poured white wine into a plastic cup. She sat back on the top of the picnic table, looking unconvinced about the stew. Returning to work, Dane juiced 4 limes into the pot, and then hand-shredded cilantro. The smells drew Carolyn near. Though sometimes Dane was clumsy in his thinking about his wife, he often perceived what would reach her. She refilled her wine, poured a cup for Dane, and brought 2 bamboo bowls. They sat on the picnic tabletop, overlooking the river. Neither spoke as they ate. They paused only to sip the crisp Pinot Gris or study the bottle. When their bowls were empty, Carolyn poured more wine, while Dane removed the cookpot from its frame and stoked the fire. The fire intensified, broadening and stretching toward the steel-gray sky. How long since he'd spoken? Dane stood, stretched his back. Drinking wine outdoors makes me feel like Hemingway. He grabbed the wine bottle, now empty. The green glass seemed luminous, a trick of evening light, or his eye compensating. The Salix Vineyards label was metallic, round like a coin, depicting a bird encircled with rough symbols. He felt a sudden impulse to throw the bottle into the river, though he was sure he wouldn't, that the impulse would pass in an instant. Dane wound up and lobbed the bottle. "Dane!" Carolyn said. As the bottle spun 30 feet through the air, Dane cringed, wishing he could take it back. He didn't want broken glass in the shallows where they waited. Carolyn and he both were scrupulous about never leaving behind trash. The bottle plunked, made a small splash. No breaking sound. At the moment the bottle left his hand, Dane had felt certain, throwing it, that it would come across as a clear, decisive gesture, an expression of a kind of sense, or an utterance of philosophical truth. Even the instant he released the neck of the bottle, he already knew it was a mistake. He couldn't even remember what he'd meant by it. "I'm just glad it didn't break," he said, wondering at the 2 minds within himself, neither understanding the other. Carolyn stood, head down. In a wide stance, she wobbled, one hand on the table. "I feel dizzy. Something's wrong." She staggered into the shallows, fell to one knee, and vomited. She threw up into the water, again and again. Dane sat watching. When her stomach was empty, Carolyn moaned and retched unproductively. Finally, she was still, quiet. She splashed her face and swished out her mouth. Dane went halfway to the water and then sat roughly where the grass ended. Carolyn crawled back to him, scowling. He laughed. "What's funny?" Her irritation broke, and she too laughed. "Your fucking stew made me puke." His laughter quickened, briefly manic, rapid fire, then stopped. Dane stood, crossed his arms across his gut, and hurried to the shallows Carolyn had just left. He leaned forward and, as if it were expected and perfectly natural, vomited in the river. His gut clenched and released, and though he tried to let it come out of him, tried not to fight, he felt his head might burst like an overfilled balloon. He rinsed, and spat handfuls of river water, then dropped to his knees on the shore and crawled back to where Carolyn lay waiting, as she had minutes earlier crawled to him. I mixed in the shrooms, chopped up teensy tiny. He tried to giggle, but the impulse was spent. I keep trying to explain. I know I keep failing. What? I didn't just want to change our setting coming out here. I wanted to change everything. The shape of our life. The size. She nodded, despite lying on her back. Did she understand? I feel good. Right now, she said. I feel carried away. Do you think it's one life? Or two? What is? You just said our life. She rolled her head side to side. I feel good right this minute, at least. Maybe it'll stick. You think it might? I'm not sure I can go all the way, she said. He rolled on his side, faced her. All the way where? Where you want. Her voice was flat, exhausted. To completely drop out. Dane remembered that night, those stars above the reservoir, imprinted vividly in memory, a cinema he could revisit at will. 25 years, a different planet. Those stars were psychedelic, full of portent and dazzling promise. He was the one who'd changed, not Carolyn, not the sky. He didn't care to recapture youth, as she believed. All he wanted was to briefly recall how it felt, an unworried mind, to be blank slate, free of the clutter and overhead of age. It's scary, Carolyn said. The sky, I mean. How high does it go? A sprinkling of clouds, elongated, stretched thin by an atmosphere wide and deep as infinity. All that moving complexity above persisted, indifferent to whether anyone watched or cared. We're the ones, he said, moving. Eyes closed. Everything still drifted. This is like... Carolyn's voice, a dry-throated croak. Like a nightmare. When you can't come out. She shifted nearer, arms and shoulders trembling. Her skin felt dead cold, inhumanly strange, like fish straight from the river. She's not cold, he thought. She's afraid. I wish you could see how it is for me. Dane spoke with such desire, such heartfelt ache, wishing he could convey some part of what he felt. Tomorrow she would forget. Dane rolled over, crawled across rough ground toward the fire. The half-full stew pot cooled on the table. He stood, wobbling absurdly as he sipped from the ladle. He lost his balance and fell. His head struck the ground so forcefully his teeth clacked. Her faith always slipped. Mood, always swerving toward doubt. He didn't want to let her poison him, was afraid there was no other choice. One of them always had to drag the other back down to earth. 9. New light flowed overhead, the sky filling cinema, slipstream passage of time, hypnotically beautiful, alternately jarring. Something flew near? He twitched, a vision of the swooping bird, gone now, dead and buried. Could the world shake him loose? Spin away? Adrift in ether space? Was Carolyn right? Her fear of night's looming threats. Unanswerable questions in such a dark place. Terrible things lurked, more or less half-solid. Night moved forward and back. The place beside the river, the reservoir, with Finney and Zoe. Other places, the future or clattering machines. Everything ran faster, despite grinding gears, misaligned. The ground was hard beneath him. Sand stuck to his back, sweat damp, hypersensitive, chill wetness, a puddle of whatever Carolyn spilled earlier. Oh, I'm fucking pissed. Sat up where? Outside the cabin. Terrible light pierced. Too bright. Look up. Always up. Pinpoint stars. The newborn kind, not yet tired. But he didn't know enough yet to show the way. Open the door! He screamed. When universes were born, what happened to the old ones? The door's already open, someone said. This way. There's no seeing. When we shed ourselves, what happened to the old skin? He crawled, blind, tried to stand, fell flat. Hands and knees climbed cabin steps. Underground machines still hummed, bitter and malign. A door slammed. Ten. Scuffling brought Dane upright. Angry mutters, answered by squawks or shrieks. He looked around, too groggy to understand. Carolyn was out of bed, scrambling naked on the floor below, as if trying to catch something. Dane rubbed his eyes, swung his legs over, found the ladder's top step. Again she lunged, bare feet slipping. Her body concealed whatever she'd captured. She forced some flailing creature, raging loudly, into a canvas duffel bag. What are you? He began. She kicked the door opening, lugging the bag two-handed, shoulders back against the heavy burden, disappeared outside. Dane waited, listening. Nothing. Carolyn? He climbed down, also still naked. She returned through the doorway, bloody from hands to elbows. It was clawing through the bag, or maybe biting. What? He asked. What bit you? This animal. Carolyn displayed deeply sliced wrists and backs of hands. Nothing like a bird or house cat could do such damage. Blood streamed down forearms, dripped from elbows onto the floor. So much bleeding, he gasped. Let's clean you up. You're always cleaning blood, she laughed with a tremor. Ever since we came here. He grabbed yesterday's shirt and led Carolyn outside. At the clearing's edge, a fresh hole had been dug, very near where he'd buried the swallow and unearthed the stone disc. The newer hole was larger. Dane sat her on the edge of the picnic table and wetted the t-shirt in the river. He returned and started clearing away the blood. So much running blood had created the impression of dire injuries, but the truth was less serious. At his touch, Carolyn jerked, as if startled. Tears flowed, as if something upsetting had returned to mind. Dane kept working, wiping her clean. As the blood was cleared away, her tears diminished. He left her alone a while. After she'd come inside and was mostly dressed, he questioned her again. What was it? Another bird? Are you stupid? Carolyn stopped, shirt barely pulled down, one arm still overhead, striving into the sleeve. In this posture, she glared. Did that thing look like a fucking bird to you, Dane? I didn't see what it looked like. She pulled down the shirt and shrugged. It sure as hell didn't have feathers. He decided he'd rather stop wondering than ask again. 11. Hiking out, Sunday evening. Dane felt a certain heaviness. That was normal, despite how much less they carried out than in. After lugging consumables like wine and liquor, nuts and vegetables, all they ever took home were clothes to machine wash and the odd piece of trash they couldn't burn or bury. Hikes back to the car on Sundays were always lighter, at least in terms of physical burden. What he felt settling upon him was a different kind of weight. A few steps short of following Carolyn into the tunnel-like opening where the path entered the trees, Dane's toe kicked something solid in the grass edging the trail. A partial glimpse reminded him of the stone disc he'd found buried, and since hidden to avoid questions. Ahead, Carolyn continued into the trees. Dane knelt and was unsurprised to find something like what he'd guessed. Another artifact of carved stone. This, too, was encircled by symbols around the rim, but these surrounded a monstrous humanoid face. Care, he called ahead. She kept walking, didn't look back. Either didn't hear or didn't want to stop. He was willing to show her, Dane reasoned, to share what he found. It wasn't his fault if she had no interest. He slipped the stone disc in his pocket and hurried into the trees. Secrets multiplied this way, every concealment growing upon prior, festering deceits. At some point, a threshold was crossed, more hidden than shared. Every old lie interlocked with 1,000 before it, an interdependent structure of deception. So much to protect. It was easier to offer further shadings, omit mention of complicated truths, than to try fitting them into existing patterns already agreed upon. What needed protecting grew larger, less stable. With passing time, barriers grew higher, more numerous. To speak up, to explicate, was riskier than silence. In his pocket, his hand found the object. Maybe some kind of ritual artifact. It seemed ancient, yet here it was, on the verge of a path he'd walked countless times before. What brought it to the surface now? If it had been dropped more recently, that would mean others nearby. The dark, occult face. Hard to deny the hint of something sinister. "There!" Carolyn shouted. She'd stopped ahead, pointing off into the trees. Dane caught up. "What? Someone?" He, too, strained to see. The sun was high, bright, but the forest here was dense. No hint of movement. No people, just trees. "What do you see?" She started walking again. "Nothing here." Though Dane had seen nothing himself, he was less certain they were alone. Recently, this place had revealed new aspects, hints of deeper significance or resident intention. His first impulse was to fear such revelations, but he believed this was because life had made him soft and too cautious. Growing up in a city, college in another city, nothing had prepared him for the possibility of meanings deeper than office toil, with short breaks for television. Time streamed past. Only the tug of its passing triggered awareness of all he'd missed. That revelation carried him here, delivered the impetus to open his eyes, start paying attention. He only had so much time. He could pack some living into the days he had left. Weren't they happier now, already? Carolyn was having trouble, but she'd catch up. Such thoughts preoccupied him on the height, through the trees. He never questioned which way to go, even when he led and Carolyn followed. On the drive home, Dane got lost. He followed streets that turned out wrong. He missed signs. Carolyn barked at him in frustration and impatience. "Help me, then," he implored. "Tell me which way." She looked around, finally admitted she wasn't sure either. He drove until night. In darkness, the signs were less confusing. Certain patterns and angles became recognizable. The neighborhood. Even when he found their street, Dane was unsure. He hesitated, idling outside the driveway, began to wonder if this was right after all. 12. The deepest reward came after Dane had caught enough fish, completed all repairs and upkeep. Such a pleasure to slow down, to simply stand motionless, present amid such beauty. Beautiful surroundings, beyond anything he'd hoped for. Sun slipping behind mountains. Blue-gray sky shifting to burnt sienna. Carolyn still hadn't returned. Dane tried reading a while, until the words dimmed on the page. Feeling hungry, he searched upriver, across the grass, toward the trees. Downriver, though she never went that way. At first, Carolyn had spent her days reading outdoors. After a while, maybe when she'd finished that stash of books, her routine changed. She began to wander, exploring for an hour, maybe two. More recently, she vanished all day. Dane went inside for the lantern. He climbed on the ladder's second step and reached, right hand braced on the platform of the sleeping loft. His fingertips found an unexpected texture beneath Carolyn's side of the mattress, some kind of packet in a Ziploc bag. Inside, a stack of photos. They'd never had a camera here. Dane had never seen Carolyn with any snapshots or albums, either here or back in town. No framed photos. She wasn't close to family, really, just him. Hard to make out in the failing light. The lantern didn't help much. Most of the images were dark, blurry. A half-submerged face peering up from green liquid. Carolyn's eyes. Where was this taken? Another, himself and Carolyn posing naked by the river. Dark clouds partly obscure the mountain. texture of raindrops on the water. Dane had no memory of the scene, no idea who could have taken this. Segments of his own life, lost to him. If he hadn't seen the photo, how would he have ever known there was something he'd missed? Another image. Carolyn standing nude, blurry, as if in motion or vibrating. The only part of her sharply defined was her hand resting on the shoulder of a taller figure covered in something like black fabric, too dark for the camera to capture. The shape appeared larger than Dane himself. What else had vanished from his mind? Experiences lost, clouds drifted away. Lately he'd wondered about Carolyn's missing time, how forgetful she'd become. Tonight, still not home. Was he forgetting too? Like these photos. Outside, splashing. Carolyn. Always, she seemed to reappear when Dane began to focus on her absence. An aspect of marriage, maybe. Connectedness. Sensitivity to another's thoughts. He wrapped the photos, returned them to their hiding place. Outside, he found Carolyn meandering along the bank, naked and deeply tanned. Her dark red hair coiled in long springs, unchanged by their return to nature. Her body's voluptuous softness had been whittled down by time and exertion into a keener firmness, still entirely feminine. Dane found her more appealing than before. Strangely, it was her wandering in avoidance of him which transformed her body in a way he found more desirable. She brushed against him distractedly, like a cat greeting her owner by rubbing past his ankle. "I want breakfast," she said. "You've been gone all day." He wondered if she was kidding. Hoped she was. "I ate without you 3 times. She turned. "You didn't wait." Hand on hip and a pout. "Care, it's night. You stayed gone." Dane took her by the shoulders. "You want smoked trout?" She started to argue, then seemed to notice the darkness and stopped herself. "No wonder I'm hungry." She drifted to the clothesline, unpinned a hanging sundress, and stepped cleanly into it. The looseness of the dress clarified the change in her physique. "Carolyn, every day you wander. Every day come back naked." "It's okay." Her eyes darted, searching for a response. "You're always confused, like you forget where you went and how long it's been." "I'll just have some wine." Then you drink some wine and everything's almost normal for an hour and we sleep. "That's not true." A hint of anger, readiness to fight. "This is the first time. Where's my clothes?" "It's not the first." He handed her the glass. "Too bad if you don't like it. You're the one who wanted to ditch out. What about what I want?" As she sipped, her eyes sharpened. "We met in college, Dane, not the forest. The deal we made, you changed it. You wanted the big house, 4 fucking bathrooms. I hoped you'd get... We're not some frontier-born couple. Everything you asked for and just wanted one thing for me. That would be different, but we... Back home, Portland, weekdays, that's for you. Weekends, I get the forest." "If it was only weekends," she said, "that would be fine." "You keep losing track of yourself out here." "Me? It's this place," she said. "It's taking us over." He glared. "You're trying to wreck this life I made, this place. It's all that keeps me going." She opened her mouth, said nothing. Every angle, every tangent had been argued a million times. Any possibility was exhausted. He wanted answers to arrive from where. Probably she waited for the same rescue or the wine to take hold, bring forgetting. He'd grown accustomed, knew it was the same for her. With every argument, to end in stalemate offered no solution and did nothing to head off the next conflict. The only effect was to increase the length of mutually acceptable silences. Seconds. Minutes. "I'm hungry," Carolyn said. Dane headed toward the solar cooler, seeking anything to serve as distraction, at least a change of subject. An idea surfaced. He turned to Carolyn, approached with a confused mixture of hatred and desire, each strengthening the other. Her dress, pulled on so casually, hung twisted across her body. One strap hung off her shoulder, the opposite breast exposed. Her skin seemed new. He reached out. She moved closer, then fell with him in rapid escalation. Desire, animal aggression, sudden sweat, hard ground beneath them, wild prickling grass above the sky. Afterward, they went inside, feeling connected. They took what pleasures remained: smoked fish, stale crackers, tart berries Carolyn had gathered. Dane remembered half a bottle of gin cooling in the river shallows. He went to retrieve it. Brief focus on stars, on sky. Was it wrong to knowingly sidestep real problems, distracted by pleasures? No, it was the only way to survive. Maximize pleasure, minimize pain. Keep going, forestall the inevitable. They sipped gin, laughed, forgot arguments. Back outside, they sat together beside the fire's sun-like core, like planets in orbit, beneath the sky spinning new stars, while old ones fell. Dane thought, this can still work. Carolyn said softly, this life can't go on. Inside, he ached, wanted to cry, to protest. How could any wound heal if endlessly torn open again, always in the same place? Just keep going. The longer they remained, the harder Carolyn would find, forcing a change. 13. Connections reformed and unraveled, too transient to be dependable. Days without words. At times, the universe itself seemed coldly indifferent. No greater separateness existed. The knowledge Carolyn, too, was alone gave no comfort. At times, they connected in ways almost tender and unspeaking, held one another. They listened to the gauzy rush of clouds, the river's murmuring churn. Two bodies shared a single bloodstream. No distinction between one reaching out, one being touched. In some brief interludes, a semblance of closeness convinced Dane that they would never again misunderstand, never argue. All certainties were delusion. Everything was changeable. When she removed herself again, to a degree impossible to ignore, he voiced grievances. Bonds reformed and rebroken too many times could never be fixed. Being only two, they always drifted back into proximity. Increasingly, one or the other gave physical hurt, harder than playful, yet short of true desire to injure. Slaps, inflicting sensation, bites, escalating intensity, then always grappling in the dust or tumbling in the grass beside the water. Legs pressed apart, legs pried open with tongue. Without conscious realization of the shift, what had begun as one thing became another. Always this resolution, this grunting and fever-mad denouement of sweat and anger, hostility and pleasure, hard to distinguish. This foundation kept them together. Always after. Sleep, reset all values to 0. 14. Dane flicked the line upstream and followed the fly's drift. Movement near the cabin drew his eye. Sometimes Carolyn returned midday for something to eat. She always announced herself. This was different. Lately, she'd hinted at seeing people around. They never found anyone, never even saw tracks. This time, Dane saw. A crouching, slinking shadow. He dropped the pole and raced to the cabin door. As he rounded the corner, someone emerged. A shirtless boy tried to run past, wearing only brown pants, torn and ragged around the ankles, dirty feet stained green from grass fields. Ribs and shoulder blades stood out sharply. Dane seized his wrist and spun. The skeletal boy yipped, struggling wide-eyed in animal fear, free hand trying to stuff something in his pocket. Dane grabbed the boy's other wrist, shook it until he dropped smoked trout fillets onto the dirt. Dane shoved him back. The kid fell, started crab-walking toward the grass. Stop! Dane jumped on him, held him pinned. The kid's skin was greasy slick. Footsteps coming around. Panic flashed, wondering if the kid wasn't alone. Without letting up, Dane twisted. Carolyn, arriving clothed, for a change. The boy cringed, tried turning his face into the ground, like a beaten dog. Dane pulled the boy's face around, trying to get a look. I caught him stealing food. She stood over them. Give him something. We have plenty. I'm not having this little wild animal thinking this is the place to come, when he wants to steal food. She lowered to one knee, touched Dane's shoulder, and half hid behind him. We have extra. We've got to head home. Home? The boy's ragged voice was inflected in a sort of drawl. Home? Where? Just hand over what he wants? Dane's brow wrinkled. That'll teach this rabid fucker not to steal? Carolyn leaned in, as if she might examine the boy, and then turned to regard Dane, nose to nose. She seethed through gritted teeth. Those times I was afraid, you said nobody was within 20 miles. I just went on errands for Mama, the boy rasped. Must have lost myself, is all. So your mama just sent you out for milk, Dane asked. Where's the nearest store? Kept searching such a long time. The boy's eyes flitted, looking for an ally. Trying to find the milk. You've been watching us, Dane accused. From our own land. Just try, the boy said. Try to go home. You end up like me. Nobody believe you, even when they are lost the same. Go home every weekend, Dane said. Leave and come back again just fine. We park on the fire lane near Romar Quarry. Dane, don't tell him that, Carolyn said. This place ain't a meant for us. It's for things that run in treetops. The boy wrenched his face from Dane's grip to look sideways at Carolyn. She know what I mean? You get a losing track. Carolyn's nails dug into Dane's shoulder. Get off him, now! She backed away, softened her voice to address the boy. We'll give you food if you go away. The boy tried to nod, still gripped under the jaw. Food now and more tomorrow. I help you find the way. No, if I give you food, go. Don't come sneaking around. The boy considered, finally nodded. Carolyn went into the cabin and returned with an orange, half a loaf of dense brown bread, and a cold potato wrapped in fire-charred foil. She held out this offering, both hands outspread, mouth contorted as if at an unpleasant taste. Dane stood, then the boy. Dust and dry grass coated the boy's back and shoulders. The boy lunged at Carolyn, snatched the potato, and shied back. He peeled back the foil and choked down half in one feral bite. If I can't show you a ways out... He paused for another bite. For sure I'd tell you some of them's names. Names of what? Dane asked. Night things here, the boy nodded at Carolyn. She know. Carolyn handed over the bread and the orange and stepped back. You're scaring her, Dane said. Take it. Go. The boy swallowed the last of the potato, giving no indication he'd heard, then looked at the orange like he'd never seen one before. His mouth opened as if he might take a bite, peel and all. Then he reconsidered. His appraising squint made him appear very adult. In stature, he appeared younger than Dane's first guess. Maybe 10 or 11. Dane clapped. Move. Now. The boy stood, rooted. Dane guided him by the shoulders, around the cabin's perimeter, and toward the riverbank. The boy allowed himself to be led. When Dane took his hands away, the boy tried to circle back. Dane blocked the way. Go! He gave the boy a shove. Looking surprised, the boy took a couple steps. Dane herded and nudged until the boy stood ankle-deep in the shallows. Upstream a bit, Dane took a small rock from the shallows. He aimed short, but threw close enough to splash the boy, hoping to scare him downstream. The boy stopped after 2 more steps, and Dane lobbed another rock. Instead of staying near shore, the boy kept backing into deeper water every time Dane lobbed a warning. The boy stood up to his chest. Dane chose a heavy rock, lobbed it two-handed from his chest like a shot put. When the splash startled the boy, this time his footing broke loose. He drifted, floating, hands raised to keep the orange and bread out of the river. Carolyn approached, where Dane stood watching from the house. What's wrong with you? Dane asked. Making him think he's welcome here? Carolyn's face tightened with angry irritation, then eased. You're okay with no human contact. To you, everyone's a threat to be driven off. That's not human, Dane. We're social creatures. We help each other. if we can. The boy was almost out of view. He drifted passively, giving no hint of trying to leave the river. No, you were right before. It's more dangerous out here than I could admit. Downstream, the boy disappeared around the bend. The river's broader now. Dane felt by naming it a river, his conscious intention had manifested a change in the physical world. Stream had become river. The water sounded thick, rushing deep and vigorous over rocks, lapping the shore. A greater flow extended the river's reach, allowed it rise above what had once constrained it. The river subsumed the sandy soil at its margins and washed it away. When did it get so deep? Carolyn asked. Must be the thaw, Dane said. Can that be right? Spring already? In some aspects, this place was not precisely what he hoped. It never would be. In other ways, his hopes were exceeded. The most pleasing surprise was the degree to which the world was malleable to intentions. He might live forever if reality could be shaped this way, the tangible, fortified by desires. Even after the boy had gone beyond seeing, Dane stood wondering, dizzy with awe at how much had already changed. One hot and windless night, as Dane and Carolyn lay in the loft looking out through the window at the round moon, he drew the outlines of his theory. In earlier times, he said, we could walk safely into the deepest, black heart of the forest at midnight on a moonless night. That place now would seem to us perfectly dark, but then we would have been able to see. Our hearing and other senses also would have dilated to perceive the layers now hidden all around us. Everything's invisible now, but it's not gone. We've lost the senses we possessed. Not vision, exactly, more like attunement, sensitivity to different energies. We were part of a connecting flow of time being born, dying, being reborn again. Trees are aware, and the wind guides us with intentions. Sometimes. Carolyn leaned on one elbow, looking down into her wine. Before civilization, the greatest influence on people was the natural world. Not culture, not language, not neighbors. Long before television, the internet, even before newspapers, our minds were differently attuned. Eyes saw other wavelengths, different colors with lost names. It's normal. Darkness causing fear, Carolyn said, visiting, as always, on nature's terrifying aspects. Because we've always been scared of it, we collect into towns or cities. Keep each other company. Dark is sacred, Dane insisted. Drifting into towns, we focused on each other. We learn to fear solitude and darkness, but we don't have to. I know you don't actually believe that, Carolyn said. I do. Then why not hike into the forest without a lantern? There's no moon. Try having yourself a real primal experience. He stood. I will. Come on, Dane. I'm going to see what it's like deep out there, he insisted. Maybe the old senses will spark up. He stepped out the doorway and into the hot night. Carolyn stood. I can't let you go alone. She picked up the lantern. Not after I teased you into it. No lantern. She hesitated, apparently considering arguing or recanting her offer, but left the lantern on the table. Outside, Dane led them across the neighboring grass field, purposely avoiding the worn paths, high-stepping instead through deeper grass and tangled weeds. Once in the trees, the going was even slower. He'd forgotten how rough the forest undergrowth used to be, having become accustomed to getting around on their own network of paths and trails. Past the forest's outer boundary, thinner undergrowth made for easier footing. Darkness clung thick, like a tangible obstruction on every side. Dane pressed outward, beyond the more familiar territory nearest their cabin. North was a direction they rarely ventured. Are you sure? Carolyn asked. Every tree clutched, moved beyond, and left behind meant he'd penetrated the forest that much more deeply. These unfamiliar surroundings felt threatening. That was the whole point. Such pure, absolute darkness made the territory seem strange. If he went deep enough, some aspect of his senses might flicker awake. This atmosphere seemed resonant, the very spaces between trees vibrantly alive. So much time spent out in nature, and they'd only brushed the most superficial edge. Just a mile or two in a truly new direction might reveal land never walked by human feet. Passing each tree, Dane felt the solidity of the trunk, rooted motionless to the ground at the same time the upper limbs strived toward the sky. His eyes cast up, he imagined the sparkling sensation to be innumerable silver stars glimmering in the gaps between the trees. Look up, his eyes, so attuned, perceived the sky's dark canopy as velvet blue. New wavelengths, Carolyn intoned. Forgotten colors. She was seeing it too. Dane opened his mouth, eager to ask what it was like for her, only to stop himself. He realized she only meant to tease him about what he'd said earlier in the cabin. Carolyn nudged his shoulder, first with her hand, then cool metal. He turned, straightened to see. She was a black shape, the same black as the backdrop of forest, yet standing apart from it. She held a subtly luminous metal flask in one hand, the cap in the other. Something I made, she sipped. A concoction. He accepted the flask, took a taste. The first sensation was the threaded opening, like a penny on the tongue. Then a surge of peppery heat and the spicy tingle of fermentation. Fumes heated his sinuses. You made this? Her featureless outline nodded. Been maturing quite a while. A bitters, technically. That's a liqueur of spices, roots, and berries. Dane took another eye-watering swig, exhaled, and handed back the flask. Yow! The flavor had a complex, aged quality. Powerfully concentrated as a Laphroaig single malt, like distilled earth, moss, and smoke, astringent on the tongue. Carolyn screwed down the cap. You like? Yes, it's strange. Incense overtones seemed to promise a visionary effect, if not hallucinations, at least a subtler alteration. Even before the drink, his world had felt strange. All within felt perfectly still, attuned to the without. Each infinitesimal moment extended in unhurried detachment from obligations. Dane was unsure what to name this sense of existing beyond reach. He used to believe the word to describe what he sought was quiet, but that was wrong. This place was alive with sounds. Sometimes the rain tapped, a million impacts on all sides, different sonic characteristics where raindrops struck trees, grass, water, stone, wind through the firs and pines, the call of birds. Morning deer bounding over the stream, half weightless. This place never lacked sound. They couldn't continue walking forever, heading away from their home. Rather than turn straight back, better to shift trajectory into a gradually narrowing curve. He could continue exploring, yet wind down like a spring, emerge downriver from their place and return along the river upstream. Though they were somewhere they'd never been, part of Dane knew where they were. He envisioned a map and saw their place on it. Nobody could remain here unchanged. The transformation Dane had undergone was as profound as if he'd discovered he could breathe underwater. So much was new. A downhill slope steepened. Gaps opened between the trees. This wasn't an emergence. They remained in the heart of the forest, deeper than ever. Across the open space, more trees. Overhead, a lavender circle of sky. They were in a clearing. A light sensation touched his face. Whiteness moved, like a firefly sweeping past. It's snow falling. Carolyn raised her palms, trying to catch fluttering white pinpoints. It's too hot. Then what? Dane shrugged. In another time, he might have been irritated by the mystery, troubled by not knowing. Stumbling through the unknown, he decided not to be afraid. He moved on, continuing their trajectory through the night forest. 16. A scream brought Dane awake. He jolted upright, found himself alone in the cabin. The door stood open. Cold, misty dawn. Another scream outside, faint and distant. She must be out beyond the clearing. Care? He shouted. No answer. He climbed down from the loft. Outside, the ground was frosted white, slick and cold under bare feet. Over the hills beyond the river, sunrise hinted. The sky bled orange into the gray. Dane turned back to face the trees, west and north. "Carolyn!" His shout echoed away. He turned, ready to try another direction, when an answer came. Another scream, wordless and raw, from the broad field between him and the trees. He ventured in. The waist-high grass was punctuated by thick, wild tufts taller than himself. "Where are you?" Dane shouted. As he passed one of those mounded growths, he spotted Carolyn in the near distance, standing amid deep grass and weeds. She wailed in distress, looking down at something he couldn't see. He ran as best he could, diagonally, through the field. He came upon Carolyn at the edge of a broad, flattened area, like part of a crop circle, where the field grass had been pressed cleanly down. He imagined a herd of elk or deer, stopping here to sleep. Dane's relief at having found Carolyn was offset by her obvious distress. If she noticed him, she gave no sign. "Carolyn, what happened?" he asked. Though he'd seen emotional outbursts from her, this was new. "What's wrong?" Despite the cold, she wore only a white t-shirt full of cuts or tears and smeared with bloody handprints. Shivering, she rubbed her arms, spreading blood from many tiny cuts. In this state, she'd probably stumbled through blackberry vines and sliced herself up. As if she'd noticed Dane for the first time, Carolyn pointed and gestured toward the flattened circle. She grasped Dane's hand, tugged him nearer. Though her attention mostly focused on the clearing, she kept glancing back over Dane's shoulder at the direction from which he'd come. Her manic, dissociated affect was bizarre and frightening. Dane gripped her shoulders, brought her around to face him. "Carolyn!" His heart thudded inside his chest. Her hyperventilation arrested with a gasp, as if the sight of Dane's face startled her. "You!" He started to shake her gently, but realized she might be hurt. "You have to tell me what's wrong." He pulled her close, wrapped his arms around her. Carolyn moaned, shaking her head, such violent trembling, like a frightened animal. Despite so much blood, the cuts on her arms and legs looked superficial. The t-shirt was soaked red. Dane backed up, giving her room. Something had terrified her. She reached down into the matted grass at her feet and snatched up something metal. It looked like a knife. She clutched it against her chest and ran past him, back toward the cabin. Dane was able to catch up, but remained a few steps behind, not wanting her to feel threatened. Back outside the cabin, she seemed confused. Maybe if he gave her some room, she'd calm down, get her talking, find out what's wrong. Sometimes she got confused like this, but always came back to herself. This was worse than ever before. Carolyn seemed incapable of speech. If he couldn't help her pull it together, he'd have to get her dressed, help her through the forest to the car. Her doctor in Portland was at least 40 miles away. Maybe there was an urgent care clinic in Sandy. "Should we go inside?" he suggested. "You need to warm up." As if a switch had turned off, Carolyn stopped shivering, climbed up on the picnic table, and sat with her feet resting on the bench. This was encouraging, seeing her sit the way they often did at sunrise, surveying the stream and the fields with a glass of wine. The object she'd picked up in the field she half concealed between forearms crossed over her chest. Dane kept telling himself it wasn't a knife. Shifting in agitation, Carolyn regarded him, her face cycling between wariness, confusion, and despair. She uncrossed her arms, dropped both hands to her sides. Dane saw clearly what she gripped in her right hand, sticky blood on the rainbow pearlescent handle. The ornamented hilt and blade were dull gold like tarnished bronze, the blade a foot long, thinner than a hunting knife, slightly tapered at the tip. The tarnished metal was speckled with dirt, as if newly unearthed after long burial. Carolyn extended her arm and made slow, distracted swipes. Better be careful, Dane thought. She didn't seem overtly threatening, but she was so far removed from her usual self. The blade might be sharp. He sat back, out of range. Carolyn's sobs began to ease. She wiped her tears and dropped the knife on the table. "I've been trying." She broke off, then started again. "Trying to talk to you." She managed to look at Dane, shook her head, and looked away again. Dane scooted closer and took her hand. "Care, the knife, where did you..." This time, it was he who trailed off. When he saw, for the first time, what Carolyn had been screaming about, his mind reeled, trying to deny the possible truth of what his eyes told him they saw. "17. The rising sun revealed impossible devastation. Thousands of massive, ancient trees had been cleared overnight. At least a highway's width of land extended like an airport runway into the mist. Not a single fallen tree was left behind. No brush or debris, not even stumps. The dirt was perfectly smooth, scraped into a pristine, almost glassy smooth plateau. Mouth gaping, Dane extended a hand, pointing dumbly at what Carolyn had already seen. "What? I never heard..." "You wouldn't wake up." Carolyn was calm now, quieted by his recognition. "I shook you, slapped your face, kept screaming your name. I thought you must be dead, so I was alone out here, all alone. So I went out." Her mouth stretched into a grimace. "The sounds were so terrible, Dane, like some end-of-the-world movie. I felt so scared, couldn't see anything at all. It was so dark, just the vibrating sounds. Roaring, tearing in this awful rumble." Dane climbed onto the tabletop, straining for a better view. The clearing almost paralleled their path toward the quarry and fire road where they always parked. It was like a clean and perfect line between themselves and civilization. Beyond both side boundaries of the cleared strip, forest resumed untouched, lush and natural as ever before. It seemed impossible. How could anyone sleep through a procession of giant earth-moving machines? Yesterday there had been no sounds of clearing or grating, no hint anything like this was coming. He jumped down. "I need to see where this leads." "Dane, no!" Carolyn snatched up the knife and leapt up. "We're not safe here. What more proof do you need? I went into that darkness." Her face broke at this recollection of trauma. She showed her blood-smeared hands, indicated the cuts on her arms and torso. "This is what happened." "And this knife," Dane extended his hand, palm up. "Where'd you get it?" Lip jutting like a girl who didn't want to give up a toy, Carolyn shook her head. Suddenly then, as if something more important just occurred to her, she set the knife aside on the table, already forgotten. She lifted her shirt front, pulled it up over her breasts, to reveal at the center of her belly a gaping, fist-sized wound. White flesh ended in a perfect, clean edge. Within the cavity where her organs should be resided a dark cluster, the size of an apple, like a mass of nuts and wood chips bound up in dark molasses or umber pitch. The sphere glistened like lacquer. Dane looked at her face, then back down. This had to be a dream. What he saw just couldn't be true. With each inhalation, Carolyn trembled. Goosebumps on her breasts, and the reaction of her nipples to the morning cold convinced Dane he was still awake. This really was the daylight world, not a dream. He had to accept some mysteries were true. Lately, so many confusing adjustments. He knelt closer, looked inside her. Something cancerous? Necrotic? Maybe she'd been driven mad by illness and tried to cut it out. The scent wasn't what he expected. Not sickness or rot, but a fragrance reminiscent of autumn, of pumpkin spice and fermented cider, and orange mounds of fallen leaves disintegrating into the grass. The fibrous mass inside her, which closer up looked like pine cone seeds bound together with black pitch, smelled sticky sweet and alcoholic. Familiar. The spiced liqueur Carolyn had made. He extended his fingers and slowly reached, afraid to tear her open wider. When he hesitated, she grasped his hand. "What are you..." he began. "Carolyn, I won't..." She squeezed hard, as if trying to crush his bones. "Feel it." She forced his hand in. The opening seemed to expand, to encompass him. The slick mass in her belly was hot, seething with tiny movements, vibrant with life as a cluster of insects. A tiny rattling, chittering sound. "It's like... you trailed off. A new form of life, he wanted to say. The sensation was unprecedented, too foreign to comprehend. He'd never touched or even seen anything like it. Her eyes fixed him. When she spoke, her tone was deadly serious. I want you to cut it out. Wait. Dane looked away. He wanted to evade. Now! Her free hand reached, snatched up the knife. He trembled in panic. Wait! How did this happen? She yanked, and his hand came free of her gut with a slurp. She slapped the knife handle into his glistening palm. Dane, do this for me. A sob shook her. Cut it out. We have to... He tried to think, to imagine alternatives. You have to tell me what's really going on. She glared at him hard, then looked away. I've been eating seeds I found. I liked how they made me feel. She smiled, then her face darkened. Dreamy, like I used to get from wine. Like the difference between a bad day and a good one. How long? Does it matter? Dane, this is why I kept secrets. You always want me to justify everything. That's not true, Dane said. Of course she was right. Everything has to be the way you decide. Just at least help me. He tested the blade with his thumb. Deadly sharp. Despite appearances, this wasn't some dug-up relic. Such a honed edge wanted to cut. Leaning close, he confronted her opening, at once a tumorous disfigurement and a beautiful, an almost sculptural arrangement which fit perfectly within her as if by design. So fragrant. He imagined the taste of it. Sweet. Dane extended the blade. A flood of memories. Wreaths made from pine cones, tree trunks dripping pitch, Halloween spice, cider hot enough to burn the tongue, rum cake with sugar and cinnamon. He delved inside her and cut. Carolyn screamed. His hand twitched in hesitation as he tried to interpret her response. Not pain or torment, but a cry of letting go, almost like childbirth, relinquishing. He cut where sticky seeds joined flesh. No blood, just that fragrant, molasses-dark pitch. Withdrawing his hand, he wanted to taste his fingers. She was watching. As soon as he removed the cluster of seeds, it ceased trembling. Quickly, it began to cool. So unmoving, it no longer seemed a living thing. The slick coating, drying, became tacky. Breathing quietly now, Carolyn pulled down her shirt and reclined on the tabletop. Dane looked for some place to dig. Always burying here. A fresh place, apart from prior holes, along the edge of the clearing. He returned to find Carolyn's eyes closed, hands covering her shirt front. No signs of trauma, just the dried smears of blood she'd had when he found her in the field. Her chest rose and fell, the slow breathing of sleep. Herself again. Concerned, Dane sat next to her. Would she recover? She looked up, smiled slightly, and sat up. You still have a wound, he began. She snatched the knife from his hand. Put that down, he said slowly. She stood. No, I'll hold on to it. Her voice was flat, with none of the earlier strain. Until you tell me we're getting out of here. Carolyn. Dane stood, backed off a little. Slowly, he ventured a reaching hand. She screamed in angry warning. She knew she wouldn't hurt him. He knew she wouldn't hurt him. To be sure, he took another step back toward the river, kept going, looking for an angle to take the knife. She advanced, blade arm extended, body angled sideways. He remembered the girl he'd met, a 19-year-old champion of the university fencing team. How different. She lunged, forward knee bent, arm extended. Dane contorted, angling his torso away from the blade. What are you doing? Breathing hard now, fully alert, no longer amused at her knife play, just angry, confused. She'd seemed to be kidding. Just minutes ago, he'd done what she'd asked. He helped her. Now he'd have to take the knife away. Dane measured what it would take. Could he strike quickly? Grab her wrist? Maybe she was just sending a message, letting him know she was serious about leaving. She lunged again, her expression so relaxed, lacking any outward hostility. Dane was unconcerned until he felt the blade cut through his shirt and bite his chest. He yelped before he realized what had happened. What are you... His fingers came away from the wound bloody. He pulled up his shirt to reveal a belly wound a hand wide, mostly a shallow parting of pink dermis and epidermis, but in the center, a deeper slashing. Where these layers were penetrated, pulpy subcutaneous fat pushed up like blood-seeping cottage cheese. Carolyn looked unsure, yet still held the knife extended. Her face gave no hint what she intended. With her free hand, she flicked a strand of curly red hair from her eyes. Dane backed up until he found the cool of the shallow water. His feet penetrated soft, muddy sand. He remembered the boy, how he'd backed him into the river just the same. He kept waiting for Carolyn to stop, to apologize. If not that, then to advance again. Nothing. No indication. Slowly, she followed him into the water. Standing knee-deep, he abruptly lunged, struck Carolyn's wrist. He expected her to evade, to cut him again. The knife, loosely held now, fell loose, dropped into the shadows, and clinked off a submerged rock. Dane wrapped his arms around Carolyn and clutched her to himself. Arms pinned to her sides, she struggled, trying to get loose. He lifted, raised her so her toes touched nothing but water, splashing the surface as he carried her out deeper. The cold flow rose around them. Where their bodies pressed together, he felt raw stinging. Her own wound, in almost the same place as his, was much worse. She gave no indication of feeling pain. Even now, he wondered what she felt in that vacant, bloodless hollow. How could he have failed to notice before now? Her growl in his ear built to a shriek of emotional release, then quiet, her face pressed against his cheek. "I'm setting you down," Dane said. Her feet fluttered, and then she stood in thigh-deep water, one hand on his arm for balance. "Dane, you're hurt." She looked confused. At least she sounded like herself again. "What happened?" His fingertips felt the cut through his wet shirt, then reached up under. Pain burned. Fresh blood trickled. He was afraid to look again. Carolyn grasped him to herself, clutched him so tightly he flinched at the pain. She must be suffering too. They wobbled, efforts at mutual support, working at cross purposes, until they fell sideways together into the water. The cold stream surged into Dane's mouth. Choking, he turned and knelt. Already Carolyn stood, dripping. She reached down into the water and came up with the knife. So quickly, trust turned to fear and back again. "Not again. Please." Dane raised both hands, palms forward. As if remembering, Carolyn's face contorted and she broke into new tears. She handed Dane the knife, handle first. "We'll be okay now." Even holding the knife, he was afraid. "No. It's too late." She shook her head, covered her face with both hands. Dane felt ashamed. She'd suffered so much, finally brought to this. He broke down, eyes burning. Tears came. How could he let her slip so far, leave his wife completely on her own, adrift? Many times he'd held himself blameless for her pain, told himself he didn't understand why she was unhappy. He'd made this place everything. The cabin, the river and trees. Those had been the entire focus of his desire. Dane embraced Carolyn, mindful of both their wounds. The sun stood high and warm. Mist burned away, all illusion stripped. The landscape stood nakedly revealed. Dane had come seeking mental quietude, some respite from life's nagging overhead. In this place among the trees, he'd tried to sever connections to a litany of demands, expectations imposed from within and without. His head still rattled with the accumulation of a million trinkets he never needed, no longer desired. There was no giving those away. Cautiously, he led Carolyn from the water. Together, they found the shore. She knelt on the firmer sand away from the riverbank, then reclined on her side. Now that most of the blood had washed away, she looked more cold and tired than wounded, as if she only needed sleep. Dane rested beside her, watching her face. His fingertips traced her arm. Just a few tiny cuts. He had too many questions, so asked none. So still, Carolyn appeared already asleep. She surprised him by speaking. "No more fighting." Her long fingers, now river clean, went to the corners of her eyes. They wiped away the last of her tears. "Please, no more. I just want to go." Dane clutched her, feeling bitterly aware just how alone they were, two together, in a rough land, far from streets, beneath an expansive, gold-shifting sky. I'll take you back. He closed his eyes. Back to your life. Just rest a minute. Then we'll go home. '18. Dane woke, face down in crusty sand, Carolyn beside him, one arm draped over his back. As he turned, her hand dragged across his wound. He winced at the pain. The front of his shirt was heavy with blood, thick as pudding. Remembering Carolyn's injury, he gently lifted the front of her t-shirt, wincing in anticipation. He was shocked to find no wound, no opening at all, just a flat surface, skin scraped raw and bloody, possibly infected. His fingers still recalled the slick, hot feeling of cutting loose that vibrant, living lump. No trace remained of what had happened. A glance upriver told him not all this morning's memories were imagined. The broad strip of forest remained stripped bare of trees. That seemed more unbelievable, a greater transgression than whatever had come from Carolyn's belly. His memory of the morning was full of contradictions. This beloved place was falling apart. Carolyn wanted to go. Maybe that was for the best. Dane stood, trying not to disturb her. The sun had advanced beyond midday, yet not quite as far as evening. He recognized it had been irresponsible to ignore his wife's cumulative distress. Marriage meant an obligation to help each other. He had to do everything he could to keep her safe and as fulfilled as possible. Too self-focused, centered too much on his own desires, Dane had managed to convince himself she was merely forgetful, just harmlessly wandering on her own. Things had degenerated too far. By the time he'd recognized trouble, it was too serious to ignore. Now he'd said the words, made the promise. They had to return home, had to make it work. Dane could rededicate himself to the other life, focus again on long-neglected priorities. Carolyn always said if Dane displayed half as much determination at work as he showed building the cabin, he'd make vice president in no time. The problem was, being VP was never something he wanted. She always persisted, as if the idea would eventually take hold if he heard it often enough. Maybe there were elements of truth in her suggestion. Certainly a man capable of building all this out of raw land could rework a suburban home and an office career into some tolerable shape. Carolyn murmured, stirring. He waited for her eyes to open, expecting the question, "Are we still going?" She didn't ask, just stood. "I'll pack a few things." She started toward the cabin. Dane lifted his shirt. Dark, thickened blood crusted over the wound, concealing the gory opening in the flesh. Probably needed stitches, though. He followed Carolyn inside, and as she stuffed items into her day pack, he found the toolbox and fished out a padlock. "Out here we never need locks," she said. "You told me." "Who knows when we'll be back?" He slung his own pack over one shoulder, thinking how worn and dirty it looked in high sunlight, and then slipped the lock through the door latch. Their departure felt different from all before. Hiking was always comfortable, natural. Today, both moved slowly, stiffly. This Dane attributed to their injuries, the emotional aftermath of wrenching confrontation, added to the shock of awakening to find the forest vandalized. Dane started out following that gap in the trees, trying to get a better look, though the direction diverged slightly from the optimal line toward their parking place. By daylight, this appeared less like road building or construction, more like the angry eradication of a strip of forest by some titan-sized scraper. A whole swatch of varied life, of trees and soil, ferns and grass, had been abruptly erased. What remained was flat soil, lacking any trace of what had lived there before. After at least a mile, seeing no variation ahead, Dane scrambled up the bank and angled through the trees toward Rumar Quarry fire lane. It seemed they'd detoured farther off the path than he'd realized. He kept thinking, here we are, believing he recognized the way, only to realize the ground was too overgrown to be their trail. They pushed on, trusting in the direction of the sun. Progress was slow in the heavy brush. Hours passed in quiet exhaustion, high-stepping through thick, weedy growth. While Dane had first tried to enjoy the meditative silence, this evolved into full avoidance of the reality of fear creeping up on him. The nagging possibility they might be lost. Would his relationship with Carolyn ever recover? He worried about her, both her physical and mental well-being. The world seemed to have shifted, a rug pulled out from beneath them. All was doubt, worry, fear. He considered admitting he was lost, asking Carolyn which way she thought they should go. If he did, probably she'd accused him of pretending, of not wanting to go home. Two trees sagged together into an arch. Dane brightened at this familiar formation, despite plodding fatigue. What he thought of as the A-frame trees were less than a mile from their destination. Though neither of them spoke, when they stumbled into the humped gravel of the fire road, not far from the yellow-bolted gate, Dane could feel Carolyn's relief was as great as his own. As always, their Audi remained sheltered behind a broad, slumping tree. The SUV was almost unrecognizable. Dark green paint, thickly layered with dust, and an array of words and symbols in day-glow yellow spray paint. One side was shot up with rust-tinged bullet holes, and a fire set on the hood had burned the paint away to reveal bare metal. The side and rear windows were smashed out. Only the windshield and moonroof were intact, though marked with yellow graffiti. Carolyn's door wouldn't budge, so she went through the driver's side before Dane and slid across. The ignition gave no response at first, then the engine lurched, hesitated, heaved again, and silenced. Another turn of the key. Nothing. Please get us home, Carolyn pleaded, obviously exhausted. The car had never been any trouble before. Dane tried the ignition again. The engine gasped, hesitated, and finally roared smoothly to life. The Audi rolled up from the shallow ditch onto the gravel. "19. Dane stopped at a T intersection, feeling stuck. Two choices. The roads within Mount Hood National Forest had passed easily, feeling familiar. Nearing Troutdale, on Portland's outermost edge, Dane first perceived his own mind fogged by confusion, his nerves jittering with panic. That way, Carolyn pointed left across the bridge. This is the Sandy River? Dane asked. Should they keep going? They always crossed the river here, he was sure. This was the back entrance to Troutdale. He started, hesitated, and stopped again, blocking the outbound lane of the historic highway as well as the narrow bridge's east end. What's wrong? Carolyn asked. Which direction? He scanned for road signs, some kind of help. Cross the river or continue along? It's like I've read about this place, heard it described, but never seen it. Isn't it this way? Carolyn asked. How could you forget? Do you remember? He asked. She turned away as if something beyond the window caught her attention. He chose at random, drove past houses, turned corners. Remember the brick house, that first corner, she said after a while. That's our neighborhood. We're nowhere close. Have to get in the vicinity first. We can't spend our lives in between, she said. Every intersection meant a new decision. He couldn't keep stopping, second-guessing. Outside the car, people stood outside houses, on sidewalks. Dane considered asking directions, but when he tried to formulate the question in his mind, He couldn't imagine how to describe where he wanted to go. Better to stop worrying, drive without intention. He trusted his subconscious to find the way. Body knows better than mind, he said. Dane was as much as a passenger as Carolyn, both taking a ride. Through suburbs, along highways, down streets like Burnside and Foster, numbered streets, markets and strip malls, so many buildings, signs, none familiar. Then, a neighborhood, a brick house at the front corner. The development seemed familiar, yet changed. Is this it? Carolyn asked. Yes, Dane pointed. The Wood Gardens Monument sign, Jefferson Street's uphill corkscrew. The little park, always vacant. No lights, no cars, strangely faded. Many houses abandoned, some gutted by fire or vandalized, many overgrown with purple vines. The crest of the hill, left turn onto Suffolk. Their house, charred and windowless, dripped with decay. In the yard stood a faded and weathered realtor's sign on a post. Dane parked, stumbled out dazed. How could this... Carolyn ran up to his side. Is this foreclosure? That's not possible, he said. If we missed a payment... The very structure tilted, like a rotting barn about to fall. Paint flaked away to reveal naked wood, not the living golden boards from which he'd built the cabin, but weathered gray, warped, and splitting along the grain. This was a dead house, penetrated by wind and rain until the rottenness inside had bloomed outward, like a flower of decay. Should we go inside? Carolyn asked. Dane stepped through the doorless entryway and led Carolyn up the creaking stairs. None of the steps were missing, but most flexed weakly, on the verge of breaking through. The master bedroom furniture was all stolen, broken, or burned. Clothing in the closet and books on the shelves dripped, grotesquely swollen, and black with mold. Nothing left. At least nothing he recognized. Carolyn ventured into the corner. The bed was a collapsed pile of disrupted springs connected by a web of haywire cords. Sodden, half-burned scraps of fabric intermingled with leaves, mounded in corners, fading into the same black mold growing up the walls, reaching for the ceiling. The room, overtaken by raw, violent nature. Every surface made unlivable, stained and rotten. Everywhere, heaps of unnameable decay, their own deteriorated possessions intermingled with dead leaves flown through missing windows and those arterial purple vines. "I'm lost," Carolyn cried over the bed. "Nothing's left." She crossed the room, retreated into the corner farthest from the open front windows. There she knelt in the deepest pile of half-dry leaves, delving in as if trying to shelter or hide. Dane followed, huddled beside her. Their bodies fell into a kind of accordance, stunned quiet, hearts pounding into forgetfulness. They lay still. In darkness, despite tension and chill unease, Dane whispered, "Try to sleep." Then a glimmer. Wakefulness. Dane rose, back aching, stiff. A different light. Dawn. At the big window looking over the street, Carolyn stood, feet amid bent mini-blind slats, fallen into a mad tangle of white metal. Her head turned at the sound of his movement. "We just need someplace safe." Her teeth chattered. Dane nodded. "Pick a place, then we'll stay." He stood, stepped stiffly toward her. She approached, met him halfway, holding something extended. A wine bottle. "I found this." He was about to say he didn't feel like drinking. Her expression stopped him. The dark green bottle looked familiar. Salix Pinot Gris, round label, silver like a coin. Why do I... That night you made fish stew, laced with those mushrooms. That was the first time I bought this wine. He nodded. I threw the bottle in the river. This specific bottle I only bought once. I remember. Could memory be trusted? The bottle was distinctive. Not so much the dark green tapered glass, but the label. Circular, silver, imprinted with the image of a bird, a swallow in flight. He'd lobbed it into the river. Had never thrown anything in the river before or since. You're saying it's the same bottle? He asked. What, I threw it in the river and it floated here? Her eyes held him motionless. Everything's changing since that first night. She thrust the bottle into his hands. The river flows the other direction, away from Portland, he said. And that's 40 miles. I don't care. Outside, the world changed. Her face was calm. Inside, we did. It makes no sense, Dane protested. If it were true, what would that mean? Would it make you want to go back again, or stay here? And what did he want? What place was a better fit? Civilization turned wild, or a forest cut away, a bit at a time? At first, he'd pulled her one direction while she pulled the opposite. He'd thought they could have both. They had to choose. Carolyn's face was drawn and pale. She looked older than Dane had ever seen. He dropped the bottle, took her hand, held it. The trees, she said. He was going to suggest the same, if she hadn't. 20. The explosive burst of tires brought Dane to awareness. He fought to regain control. Too late, the vehicle skewed sideways off the loose gravel shoulder and crashed with a metal shearing thud nose down in a drainage culvert. Carolyn flew out of her seat. Her head snapped the rear view mirror loose from the windshield, and she slumped heavily back. The car ticked. How'd we... Dane trailed off. How had they gotten there? He meant to ask. Something was missing. Sprocket holes torn loose. Too many jump cuts past important scenes he needed to remember. The road looked familiar. A lightning-split tree sagged halfway down to the road, 100 feet away, not far from the usual parking place. The fire road. We're back, Carolyn said. I was trying to drive us home. Dane struggled to make sense of disjointed events, to discern connections, like memories from a fever dream. Only we're facing the wrong way. This is home, remember? Carolyn touched a trickling forehead contusion, examined bloody fingertips. The house isn't ours anymore. This is all that's left. The ticking engine slowed, skipped beats. Dane's door was jammed against the ditch wall. He contorted through the glassless window frame. Standing on the hood, he helped Carolyn out. I remember now, he said. The cabin I made. The forest. No choice but to hike. Try to find the way. Gaps between trees opened, enticed passage, only to close again, blocking the way. The forest seemed to shimmer, to expand and contract. Trails narrowed, seemed to press in, then abruptly opened upon white, brittle sky. The ground became a jagged spill of freshly shattered rock, dynamited remnants of some vanished mountain. This gave way to an area of intense burn, all flora eradicated. Only black stubs remained. Amid such featureless areas as these were more dramatic constructs, constrained to geometrically perfect segregations. Circles of asphalt, square drainage pits, filled with brown-black liquid, giving off waves of heat. Between such features, the land opened, became more wild again. Familiar pines, fields of bare grass and wildflower. This land they'd known so intimately seemed changed, both in general shape and in details of plant, rock, and soil. I keep thinking, Carolyn said, walking behind. What if we're dead? We're talking to each other. That proves we're alive. Everything seems fine now, but remember the times you wouldn't wake up? Even when I shook you and screamed. I'm awake now. We both are. Maybe it's hell. We're stuck. Trying to leave. She looked up. End up floating forever. Near the tips of trees. No, Dane said. We just lost track of things. We were stuck a while, like a record, skipping. He was feeling the difficulty of the walk. Heart pounding, weak in the knees. He didn't want Carolyn to know how much trouble he was having. Every muscle ached, every joint. The chest wound wasn't the worst. In fact, it already seemed to have faded into history. What about Carolyn? How was she able to hike after he'd cut her open only yesterday? Over wet, spongy moss, every step a conscious effort. On both sides, dewy ferns waved, taller than a man's head. Ancient firs strained skyward, vying for a taste of light. Dane was looking up, trying to see the sky, when a sudden grassy downslope tumbled him out of the trees. He slid sidelong into a perfectly smooth plateau, dry and unnaturally flat and linear as a 10-lane highway. This, at least, he recognized. Behind him, Carolyn approached the drop-off. "Careful!" he shouted. "It falls away!" His hip screeched painfully as he rose to help her down. The featureless corridor extended ahead, roughly toward the cabin, as well as backward in very nearly the direction from which they'd come. Dane hoped they'd found the way they'd come this morning. No, yesterday. When was it? After a while, he noticed at frequent intervals narrower, street-like pathways branching away. This wasn't the single straight runway he'd imagined, but more like a grid. Each offshoot, precursors to lesser streets, stretching off the broad central spine. Each corner, where digressions split away, was marked by a post. All these lacked any sign. Carolyn said something behind him. At that moment, his attention flitted to a bird in a diving trajectory. Dane ducked, raising a hand to fend off the bird, but felt nothing. He looked up, expecting to see the bird winging itself into the trees, but couldn't find it. He remembered that first night inside the cabin. Like the confused swallow, he felt lost. If everything was always changing, how could he know which direction to head? Only the momentum he'd carried out of the forest bore him on, despite aching muscles and a mind fogged with fatigue. The trees to both left and right thinned, growing smaller and too sparse to be considered a forest. Along both sides of what Dane had come to think of as a dirt highway were elevated fields, intermittently mounded with tangled grass and vines, some of the heaps dry and partially burned, others damp and rotten. Jagged shards of pale wood protruded from humps of mounded dirt and rock, detritus of leaves and stripped limbs of trees littering the forest's edge. Further on, forming a barrier against the deep and now distant forest, a row of dead trees stood inverted, trunks jammed into the ground, roots skyward. Water collected into irregular, stagnant green pools. Still no sign of the river Dane had hoped would guide him to the cabin. The land was profoundly changed, almost unrecognizable. His heart thudded weakly under cumulative panic and disorientation. He sought any landmark, any reference point at all. Mount Hood was visible even from their backyard in Portland, but from here, no sign of it. No mountains in any direction. Dane could only press on, ignore the dizziness. Finally, he discovered, to the right side of the cleared space, what had become of the river, a chalk-white trench amid rounded rocks, an alkaline scar upon fields overrun with brown weeds. He turned back, excited to show Carolyn what he'd found. She wasn't behind him. As far as he could see, both directions, even up on the bank, there was no sign of her. "Care?" he shouted. Irritation flared. Certainty she'd followed her own path left him to drift. He shouldn't be angry. Hours had passed since he'd talked to her, lost in his own things. She must have thought better, split off and followed her own path. That would be nothing new. They'd both promised things would change, but he couldn't blame her for falling back on old patterns. Certainly she knew these fields well enough. She'd probably already found the cabin and waited there to tease him for falling behind. 21. As he walked, Dane was surprised at how keenly he felt his solitude. He tried to keep in mind he was walking toward Carolyn, not abandoning her behind. So much of their time lately had been separate, Carolyn reading or wandering while he fished or worked. Now her absence pained him, not only out of worry, but selfish concerns as well. What if her disappearance hinted at some threat to both of them? Following the line of the dry river grew difficult. The rocky bed sunk beneath chalky soil, shot through with grass and thorny weeds. Seeing a rise ahead, Dane thought he might have found Carolyn's sunbathing windbreak. What he found instead was a standalone, crumbling stairway, made of concrete and river rock, leading up to nothing. He climbed to the uneven platform, steadied himself, and looked around. No movement, no sign of any path. Feeling hopeless, he descended. Just then, the wind whipped up, pulling at his clothes. It seemed to impel him onward in a direction he still thought of as downstream. As dehydrated as the lost river, and so pained with fatigue that he walked hunched and limping, he gave in to what he imagined must be a trick. He would follow the wind's guidance. Daylight failing into dusk, Dane stumbled past a rectangular pad of deeply cracked asphalt, which formed the base for an installation of playground equipment sufficient for a school full of children. Stainless steel posts supported structures lacquered green and yellow. Beyond the swings, whose chains swayed silently in the wind, he saw his cabin. At first, Dane didn't recognize it, took it instead for someone's abandoned shack. The grass perimeter was overrun with thick weeds, the wood exterior weathered gray, both windows glassless. The door squeaked half open on rust-shot hinges. He found the interior overrun by withered leavings of nature's cycle of growth and decay. From spongy floorboards grew a vein-like tangle of dark vines. In the loft, some animal had made its den. No longer Dane and Carolyn's bed, but a beast's abode of shredded hides and varied skeletons, some dry, some meat-flecked, others stretched with drum-like yellow skin. An accumulated perimeter of gnawed, leafless tree limbs formed a giant nest, upon which a desiccated creature sprawled. It resembled a great cat, hairless and gray-skinned, oversized skull jutting serrated tusks, massive rear legs jointed the wrong way. This had to be an assemblage of found parts, the bones of several creatures, someone's idea of an affront to this abandoned home. He ascended to the ladder's second rung and reached beneath the mattress's disintegrated base. The plastic-wrapped cache of photographs remained where he'd left it. How long ago? It seemed forever. He'd always meant to ask Carolyn to explain. The packet, thicker now, contained images he hadn't seen. Two men, faces covered with dark handkerchiefs, stood by a deformed trophy animal, hanging, inverted from a rope. A clear snapshot of Carolyn, reclining nude and smiling, on a steep fall of jagged rocks, glossy black as obsidian. A burlap swaddled baby, face and shoulders crisscrossed with angry scratches. Dane himself, reaching into the slit belly of a large animal, oozing tarry blood. No memory of this or any others. Most were abstract, lacking recognizable pictorial content, yet shimmering with a vibration of memory. Such vague recollections were accompanied by hallucinatory sounds, smells, echoes of meaning, just beyond reach, sufficient to terrify. The last photo, Dane and Carolyn, posing shoulder to shoulder, naked before the river, faces much older. Who had taken the photos? He remembered her absence. He whispered. He went to the door, alert for sounds of her. The transformation outside disturbed him. So foreign. Nothing made any sense. Upturned trees in a fence-like row. Miles of stripped land, half-developed yet vacant. Concrete beginnings for absent houses, unmade neighborhoods, invisible schools. The outline of a world without content filled in. Carolyn! No movement. No sounds. Not even an echo. Between the graded landscape and the forest, the grass field remained as it was, perhaps slightly overgrown. There his eyes drifted, saw movement, a shape, hiding behind a clump. Dane ventured in. As he neared, the human silhouette peeked out. Not Carolyn, someone taller. As if they'd seen Dane, they crouched back. Adrenaline surged, enough to overwhelm fatigue. He ran, trying to curve around, gain an angle on the hiding figure. His boot caught on uneven rocks concealed in grass. He stumbled, stopped. Not just a few rocks, but a mound. Someone made this. Behind the clumped grass, the figure stood, moved into view. Not Carolyn. A thin boy. The food thief. Older now. Without thinking, Dane knelt, picked up a rock to throw. He stopped, frozen by what he saw beneath him, amid the smooth gray stones from the river. At one end of the mound, a rectangle of wood, polished. Carolyn's name carved into it. He didn't understand. Who would put Carolyn's name here? The abandoning sun left only a rim of antique orange above the flat horizon, overwhelmed by a broader, lightless sky. Why hadn't he found her? He looked up. The boy stood motionless, nearer than before. Dane took up the board, traced fingertips through indented letters. Beneath the board hid the long-bladed knife. The rainbow metal handle still shone. He'd missed something. Time passed, more than he realized. Nothing left of all that had fled. He looked back, tried to measure. Impossible to recount what he'd seen. The boy stood just beyond arm's reach. Still ragged and dirty, but now taller than Dane. Broad in the chest. Not a boy. We don't have any food to give, Dane said. The other approached in timid half-steps until he knelt next to Dane. He took the wooden sign from Dane's hands, straightened the disturbed stones, and replaced the sign where Dane had found it, first picking up the blade. He made a small, careful adjustment to the angle at which the board rested. This was a burial mound. The other was an adult man, Dane now saw. He looked Dane in the eye and offered the knife, handle first. Without stopping to think whether he wanted the knife, Dane accepted. He didn't need knives, though he needed to remember where he'd lost Carolyn. The last thing he remembered, he was cutting sickness out of her belly. There was something about returning to the city. So much had happened in the short time since they'd first come here. His plan, seeking for something indeterminate. A breath of nature, maybe. He never wanted to cut loose from everything. Maybe he had. No matter what, everything fled. Especially time. The man picked up a flat stone disc from among the others. Dane hadn't noticed it before. It was smooth, like the rest, but flat. When Dane accepted the offered stone, his fingers discerned markings in the surface. The shapes were too faint to read in the dark, but he could almost read them by touch. The man stood and moved very slowly in the direction of the cabin. Dane remained alone at his wife's grave, chilled by the black air, breathing it in. Soon he became aware of light flickering. The other man had built a fire in the pit outside the old cabin. He sat on top of the picnic table. Dane approached, more easily now that there was light. Tall trees made a jagged horizon, black against near black. The sky's expanse deepened to reveal millions of spinning stars, seeming to vibrate brilliance against pitch-black infinity. His eyes believed there was little difference to see between day and night. Nearing the radiant fire, Dane shivered. As he held out hands to the warmth, he realized he still grasped the stone disk. Turning it against the firelight revealed perimeter lettering like a coin. The central image was a swallow in flight. The first night, he remembered that, sharp as yesterday, the swallow had swooped in just as he presented the cabin to Carolyn, found itself trapped, confined where it had expected wide open air. Dane wanted escape. Even still, where to now? The words around the stone's edge finally made sense. He felt the words with fingertips as much as he saw them with eyes. While you look away, the stream is moving past. Dane's voice sounded strange, as if he hadn't spoken in a long time. In this inconstant light, the cabin appeared new. As far as the firelight extended, everything remained just like before. Squatting barefoot in the packed dirt, Dane set the stone aside, freeing both hands for that most primal human gesture. Palms up, he absorbed the fire's heat. His skin looked ancient, spotted and wrinkled, white crepe over a network of purple and blue. Dane wanted to see his own face, to see if he was still himself. He had no mirror. He looked up, caught the boy watching, with Carolyn's eyes.